He was more than just a Beatle. John Lennon was a cultural revolution wrapped in flesh and blood. But behind the global fame and timeless music lay a boy shaped by heartbreak and abandonment. Born on October 9, 1940, in a war-torn Liverpool, Lennon's life began in chaos and never truly escaped it. Separated from his mother Julia and raised by his strict Aunt Mimi, young John grew up wrestling with a deep emotional void. That pain became fuel for his art, his rebellion, and his relentless pursuit of truth through music. But as his fame soared, so did the darkness behind the curtain, and now, decades later, the mystery that haunted his life, and death, has finally come to light. Just as John Lennon began to rebuild a fragile bond with his mother Julia during his teenage years, fate delivered a brutal blow. She was struck and killed by a car in 1958. The tragedy shattered him. Her death became a permanent scar, one that echoed through his lyrics and haunted the melodies of his most vulnerable songs. Despite the chaos of his home life and the emotional turmoil he carried, Lennon's fiery spirit and razor-sharp mind were undeniable. He challenged authority, questioned norms, and sought deeper meaning in a world that often made little sense to him. In 1957, he formed a skiffle group called the Quarrymen, planting the seeds of a revolution. When Paul McCartney and George Harrison joined, followed by Ringo Starr in 1962, the band transformed into the Beatles, an unstoppable force that would redefine music history. With Lennon at the creative helm, they didn't just make hits, they sparked a cultural upheaval, turning pop into poetry and noise into art. John Lennon's songwriting partnership with Paul McCartney became the gold standard of musical collaboration, unmatched in influence, brilliance, and legacy. Together, they crafted some of the most iconic songs in history: Help, All You Need Is Love, A Hard Day's Night, Come Together, and Strawberry Fields Forever. But it was Lennon's unique voice, introspective, rebellious, politically aware, and often tinged with surrealism, that gave their music its emotional depth and intellectual edge. He challenged the limits of what rock could express, using lyrics to confront war, inner turmoil, love, and social change. As the 1960s unfolded, the Beatles became far more than a band, they became a global movement. From 1963 onward, they ignited a cultural explosion known as Beatlemania, captivating millions across continents. Their music didn't just top charts, it defined a generation. With hits like I Want to Hold Your Hand, She Loves You, A Hard Day's Night, and Help, they dominated airwaves and shattered records, becoming the voice of youth, rebellion, and artistic revolution. At the center of it all stood Lennon, brilliant, bold, and impossible to ignore. With every album, their creative development grew more apparent, moving from straightforward love ballads to intricate pieces that defied genre boundaries. For both the band and rock music in general, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band reached a creative zenith with its 1967 release. Their notoriety went well beyond only music. The Beatles were seen to be at the vanguard of a cultural revolution that combined rebellion, fashion, politics, youth, and freedom. But the untimely passing of their longtime manager, Brian Epstein, in 1967 was a terrible blow that caused the group's cohesiveness to gradually fall apart. Epstein, who was frequently referred to as the fifth Beatle, had been the unifying factor that maintained the harmony of the group's personalities and economic dealings. No one in the band was able to take over as leader after his untimely death from an accidental drug overdose. Soon, tensions increased, especially over financial choices, artistic autonomy, and outside influence. Conflicts over the band's new commercial strategy under Apple Corp., Paul McCartney's insistence that his future father-in-law run the group, and John Lennon's increasing engagement with avant-garde artist Yoko Ono all contributed to the band's disintegration. Under the strain of celebrity, divergent opinions, and individual goals, the close-knit band of four musicians started to deteriorate. John Lennon took the crucial choice to quit the Beatles in 1969. Even though he didn't announce his departure right once, he started to consider a musical identity separate from the band because of his connection with Yoko Ono, which had become essential to his life on both a personal and artistic level. Lennon had a turbulent last year with the Beatles. Despite Abbey Road's final display of the group's talent, the Let It Be sessions were tainted by obvious conflict, and it was obvious that their days together were coming to an end. In a September 1969 private meeting, Lennon announced his departure. However, it would be Paul McCartney who would officially announce the band's dissolution in April 1970. Lennon began a very private and frequently politically contentious solo career after leaving. John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, his first solo album, was a raw and emotionally charged record that came out in 1970. The album, which eschewed the Beatles' opulent production approach, showed Lennon at his most vulnerable and unadorned. Lennon explored his violent upbringing, disenchantment with celebrity, and rejection of religious and cultural establishments in songs like Mother, Working Class Hero, and God. The album marked a daring artistic rebirth and received praise from critics for its honesty and minimalist manner. It presented the world with a different Lennon, one who was more focused on truth and self-discovery than on winning over admirers or achieving chart success. Lennon decided to withdraw from the limelight in the middle of the 1970s, going into what he referred to as his house husband phase. John made the deliberate choice to put his music career on hiatus in order to concentrate on parenthood, a position he had mostly missed with his first son, Julian, after he and Yoko delivered their son Shaw Lennon in 1975. In their New York City apartment, Lennon read, cooked, and relished a more sedate existence away from the spotlight during this period. But this time was also characterized by personal difficulties, such as his well-known problems with drunkenness and unpredictable conduct. Prior to his sabbatical, Lennon lived in Los Angeles for 18 months, separated from Yoko, and partied and drank heavily with other celebrities, such as Harry Nilsson and Ringo Starr. He later referred to this period as his lost weekend. There were a number of events, including a well-known expulsion for disruptive behavior from the Troubadour nightclub. These incidents garnered media attention and highlighted the intense emotional upheaval Lennon was experiencing while attempting to maintain equilibrium in his life after the Beatles. With the release of Double Fantasy, an album co-produced with Yoko Ono, in 1980, Lennon made his eagerly awaited musical comeback after a 5-year break. Their love, maturity, and newly discovered contentment were all celebrated on the record. With songs like Woman and Just Like Starting Over, it presented a revitalized Lennon with themes of peace, family, and reconciliation. Despite the initial polarization of critics, the record became popular because fans were excited to hear Lennon's voice once more. John Lennon's first marriage to Cynthia Powell marked the beginning of a number of pivotal periods in his personal life. The two became acquainted in the late 1950s while they were both enrolled in Liverpool College of Art. Lennon's captivating charisma, rebellious personality, and emerging musical aptitude first drew Cynthia, a quiet and sophisticated young woman. A romance developed between them throughout their time as students, despite John's frequently erratic and temperamental disposition. Their relationship became more serious, and when Cynthia fell pregnant in the middle of 1962, Lennon, who was still in the early phases of Beatlemania, made the decision to wed her. The wedding was held at the Mount Pleasant Register Office in Liverpool on August 23, 1962, in a low-key civil ceremony. It was a little event that was mostly forgotten due to Lennon's growing popularity with the Beatles. A son named Julian Lennon, who would go on to become a successful artist in his own right, was born to the couple shortly after, on April 8, 1963. But their marriage quickly started to suffer from the pressures of Lennon's rapidly advancing career and the constant turmoil of celebrity. John spent more time touring or recording and less time at home as Beatlemania swept the globe, leaving Cynthia to raise their kid mostly by herself. Their relationship deteriorated due to Jay's infidelity, frequent absences, and emotional distance. Domestic life was further made harder by his increasing drug usage and the demands of being one of the most well-known individuals on the planet. As Lennon grew more estranged from his home life and longed for a closer spiritual and creative bond in the middle of the 1960s, the situation deteriorated. John's marriage to Cynthia was already in trouble by 1966, when he met avant-garde artist Yoko Ono at a London art show. His instantaneous and deep intellectual and emotional bond with Yoko accelerated the breakdown of his first marriage. After 6 years of marriage, John and Cynthia formally separated in November 1968, ending a phase of his life that was strongly associated with his early notoriety and the pre-psychedelic Beatles era. Lennon made a daring move in 1969 when he wed Yoko Ono, a vocalist, multimedia artist, and vocal peace activist of Japanese descent. In the years after their first encounter, the two had grown inseparable and maintained a close spiritual and creative cooperation in addition to a romantic relationship. Their marriage, which took place in Gibraltar on March 20, 1969, became a symbolic union that went well beyond conventional nuptials. Lennon's life entered a new stage that was focused on extreme self-expression, social activism, and personal reinvention. Using their marriage as a platform to advocate for global peace and protest, they notably staged a bed-in for peace in Amsterdam during their honeymoon. Vietnam. Many fans and media outlets blamed Yoko for Lennon's growing distance from the Beatles, which made their relationship contentious. But Lennon said that Yoko was a source of power and inspiration, pushing him to work on solo endeavors and explore more avant-garde forms of art. In addition to their creative partnerships, their union produced their only child, Sean Lennon, who was born on October 9, 1975, which also happened to be John's 35th birthday. In contrast to Julian, John deliberately tried to be Sean's loving and present father. He took a 5-year break from the music business to become a stay-at-home father in New York City, where he focused on raising his son, baking bread, and creating a more subdued, grounded family life. During this period, Yoko continued to oversee their commercial and creative endeavors, solidifying her position as both a muse and a powerful influence on his post-Beatles career. Many of Lennon's solo albums, such as Imagine and Double Fantasy, demonstrated her influence as her experimental and boundary-pushing style of art merged with Lennon's more melodic and reflective sensibilities. Despite the public's constant scrutiny, their relationship was incredibly close and cooperative, and it lasted until Lennon's untimely death in 1980. The circumstances surrounding John Lennon's life and untimely death have plagued fans, historians, and conspiracy theories for decades. Although the basic facts of his assassination on December 8, 1980, outdoor the Dakota Building in New York Town have long been regarded. Shot with the aid of a deranged fan, Mark David Chapman. The full story at the back of his murder, the questions of why and how, and the wider context of his life's final years have remained cloaked in layers of ambiguity, conflicting narratives, and painful hypothesis. But currently unearthed documents, long-withheld interviews, and obscure recordings may additionally have sooner or later unraveled the mystery. And the truth is some distance darker than all people had hoped. The new revelations do not simply revisit the tragic night of Lennon's murder. They delve deep into a psychological and political underworld, elevating uncomfortable questions about surveillance, manipulation, and whether or not John Lennon, as soon as a image of peace, became too risky for sure powerful pursuits. For years, rumors had swirled that Lennon become on an FBI watch list, a detail confirmed decades later through declassified files. However, the mystery grew murkier while insiders near Lennon commenced to talk out, hinting that his cell phone calls were monitored, his public appearances tracked, and his political activism, specifically his opposition to the Vietnam struggle, and his assist for radical groups had made him an enemy in some of the highest circles. Become Lennon's assassination in reality the act of a mentally ill guy looking for notoriety, or turned into it something a ways more calculated? This unsettling question has received traction as new research suggests Chapman may additionally have been extra than just a lone wolf. Although he famously carried The Catcher in the Rye and noted the book as his manifesto, further evaluation of his psychiatric history, inconsistencies in his recollection of events and his strangely composed demeanor after the capturing have sparked theories approximately psychological conditioning. Some pointing to ability. Links to intelligence programs like MK Ultra. Even more worrying are the insights drawn from Lennon's very last interviews, particularly his haunting statements in 1980 that he felt watched and hazardous. He spoke openly about the pressures of fame, the betrayal of antique buddies, and the overpowering experience of being surrounded by those who wanted to silence him, no longer simply artistically, however permanently. "You don't know how close to the edge I've been," Lennon stated in one of his last conversations, "and the way frequently I've appeared over it. In current months, a former security consultant who as soon as labored with high-level intelligence agencies and later claimed to have been assigned to screen cultural figures launched a memoir under pseudonym. In it, he defined Challenge Eclipse, a cold operation designed to neutralize public influencers deemed subversive threats. Though he in no way named Lennon without delay, the timing, descriptions, and objectives align eerily with Lennon's activities within the 70s and early 80s. If this demanding narrative is even partially proper, then the tragedy of John Lennon's loss of life extends some distance beyond the loss of a musical genius. It becomes a grim mirrored image of the way establishments may also are searching for to silence the voices that task them most. Lennon, who once sang, "Deliver peace a threat," may have paid the final rate for doing simply that. Even as the official record will in all likelihood by no means confirm such suspicions outright, the mounting proof forces us to rethink what we notion we knew. The thriller of John Lennon's loss of life, once notioned to be a sad however isolated occasion, now appears as a complicated net of politics, paranoia, and electricity. And as that net will become more seen, one thing is an increasing number of clean. The fact eventually surfacing after decades inside the dark isn't always just unsettling. It isn't always suitable.